Hello and welcome back. In our final video for our Learning and Behaviorism unit, we are going to be taking a look at observational learning, how we learn by watching others. And the reason why we look at observational learning is because there are some limits on operant conditioning. Researchers have found that particularly when it comes to shaping the behavior of animals, biological predispositions work best when it comes to operant conditioning. Meaning, the reason why you have a pigeon peck to get food as opposed to using its wing is because pecking is a more natural behavior for a pigeon than using its wing for anything other than flying. It's referred to as a naturally adaptive behavior. If we try to shape an animal to do something that is not naturally adaptive, we often see instinctual drift, where they will start to drift back to their natural behaviors because the original behavior they're trying to shape is not naturally adaptive. There's also some criticisms to classical conditioning that say it ignores the conscious awareness portion of classical conditioning, that when you are aware of your conditioning, you could actually have an influence. So it's not entirely involuntary and physiological. If you know that conditioning is being placed upon you, there are steps that you can take to try to prevent that from happening. So there were some biological and cognitive processes that were ignored in early behaviorism. The cognitive map, for example, the idea that we can learn something without actually demonstrating our learning, was something that was demonstrated with rats in a maze. That with the absence of a reward, they are still learning the path. They're still learning the different areas and corners of the maze, but they might not actually show their learning until they have an incentive. And that's referred to as latent learning. Learning that happens beneath the surface that we create a cognitive map for, but we don't actually demonstrate our understanding until an incentive arrives. And incentives can both be helpful and harmful when it comes to learning. Extrinsic motivation is when we get rewards for behaviors that cause those behaviors to continue. But intrinsic motivation is when we do something for the natural enjoyment that we get out of it, just because we like to do something. And researchers have found that when you are given external rewards for something you're intrinsically motivated to do, that it can actually lessen the enjoyment that we get out of it. Researchers have found that children playing with markers, for example, if they're given rewards for using them, are going to be less likely then to use them on their own. But if they were never given a reward, they're more likely to use them just because they enjoy them. We see this from children all the way up to professional athletes who start to lose their love of the sport because they're no longer playing just because they love it, but because of the money that's associated with it. That they feel they have to prove or earn the amount of money they're making instead of playing just for their love of the sport. And that is referred to as the overjustification effect. So what are some other ways that we learn, if not classical and operant conditioning? Well, we can learn from observing and watching others. Modeling is when we do a behavior that we would like other people to emulate or replicate. Oftentimes children, for example, will emulate or replicate things they see their parents do, and so parents try to model good behavior for them. Observational learning is when we watch others and learn to act the way that they do. Sometimes we can actually receive vicarious reinforcements and punishments through observational learning. For example, if you have a sibling who's ever gotten in trouble for doing something wrong, you may not have to ever do that behavior, but by seeing them get punished, it was enough for you to learn that you should not do that behavior either. And that would be observational learning. And studies have shown that observational learning can have both positive and negative effects. Pro-social behaviors are going to have a pro-social effect. When we see other people do good, we're more likely to emulate and replicate it, and that is going to have a positive effect in our society. But antisocial behavior is also going to have an antisocial effect. Cycles of aggression in families, for example, often continue because those behaviors are modeled and observed, and that causes them to continue into future generations. And the reason why we are so good at replicating what others do is because of the mirror neurons in our brain. This is a fascinating finding by researchers that show that when we watch other people doing something, our brain lights up as if we are doing it as well. This might explain why some people really like watching TV shows or movies, because they really feel a part of the experience. When you watch someone else do something, our brain lights up as if we are doing it. That makes it easier for us to then replicate that behavior. Watching professional athletes, for example, helps us in our own sporting endeavors as well. Mirror neurons seem to be the basis for both imitation and empathy. That when someone is making a facial expression, for example, we can feel what they feel. So if they are happy, we can feel their joy. And if they are sad, we can feel their pain. So mirror neurons seem to be a big piece of both observational learning and empathizing with other people in our society. So these are the ways that we can learn through classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of how our outside world can have an influence on individual behavior. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember, be kind to your mind.